Hello and welcome to New Central Television. I am Dakbo Adigboyi, and here are stories making headlines beyond the continent. We begin the news with Israel-Hamas conflict, where Israel Prime Minister, that's Benjamin Netanyahu, has threatened that the military would launch a good offensive on Gaza's far southern Rafah city with or without a truce deal being negotiated with Hamas. Netanyahu issued the warning despite strong concerns raised by top ally Washington, and hours before U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken was set to arrive in Israel on his latest Middle East crisis tour. The Prime Minister's comments came as Hamas was weighing the latest plan for a truce proposed by Cairo talks with U.S., Egypt, and Qatari mediators that had raised cautious hopes for an end to the fighting.
כי אין לנו ברירה אחרת. אנחנו נשמיד את גדודי החמאס שם, אנחנו נשלים את כל יעדי המלחמה, כולל השבת כל חטופינו.
In the meantime, the head of the United Nations Agency for Palestinian Refugees says $267 million in its funding was still suspended over allegations some UNRWA staff participated in the October 7th Hamas attack on Israel. The accusations in January led to many donors freezing some $450 million in funding at a time when Gaza's 2.3 million persons are in dire need of food, water, shelter, and medicines. Now, many countries have since resumed their donations, while others have not, including the United States, which passed a law blocking funding until at least March 2025. Switzerland is due to take a decision on whether to resume support on Wednesday.
January, you remember that once the allegations have been made public, up to 16 countries suspended the contribution to the agency. The good news is that as of today, most of the donor countries have resumed their contribution to the agency. We just have a handful of a country who still need to take a decision. How much funding is still suspended to the agency? The estimated, when we say suspended, it's money we were aware, which was committed, and which remained suspended for the agency. The total amount is $267 million US dollar. The bulk of
Franco Palestinian activist Rima Hassan says Netanyahu is worse than Putin. Hassan stated this at a rally in support of the left-wing populist France On Board party. Meanwhile, Hassan and France On Board leader Mathilde Panot have been summoned by the Paris Judicial Police as a part of an investigation into defense of terrorism after they made comments linked to the war in the Middle East.
Mais je pense que chacun doit prendre la mesure de la gravité de ce que nous sommes en train de traverser, parce qu'il est inédit dans l'histoire de la Ve République que vous ayez des personnes qui soient convoquées devant des services d'enquêteurs pour avoir exprimé leurs opinions et pour des propos qui relèvent exclusivement de la liberté d'expression. Véritablement,
Parallèle à faire, et je crois que nous avons une responsabilité collective et individuelle pour dénoncer un travail de lobbyiste pro-israélien.
Il y a un parallèle à faire entre Netanyahou et Poutine.
Mais Netanyahou est pire que Poutine. Vous comptez les années de violation du droit international, Netanyahou est pire que Poutine.
Aucune attaque politique, aucune intimidation policière ou judiciaire ne nous fera jamais changer les idées que nous portons. Oui, j'assume de dire qu'il y a un génocide en cours et que c'est notre devoir et notre honneur de le dénoncer. Nous le dénonçons et nous le dénoncerons encore.
Let's also tell you that the U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken has called for the redoubling of efforts to bring aid into Gaza as he held talks in Jordan on coordination. Now, Blinken, on his latest tour of the region since the Gaza war erupted in October, observed Jordan's efforts to bring in food and supplies and praised the extraordinary work led by the United Nations. Blinken met separately with King Abdullah II and Foreign Minister Adnan Safadi, both on aid and a diplomacy for a temporary ceasefire between Israel and Hamas that includes the release of hostages. Jordan's foreign ministry says that the foreign minister had raised the necessity of starting to implement a comprehensive plan to end the occupation and achieve just and comprehensive peace within the framework of the two-state solution. Meanwhile, dozens of protesters took over a building at Columbia University in New York early on Tuesday, barricading their entrances and unfurling a Palestinian flag out of a window in the latest escalation of the demonstrations against the Israel-Hamas war that have spread to college campuses nationwide. Protesters in Columbia's Manhattan campus locked arms in front of Hamilton Hall, carried furniture and metal barricades to the building, one of several that was occupied during the 1968 civil rights and anti-Vietnam War protest. Columbia Vice President of Communications, Ben Chang, said the university had begun suspending students as part of the next phase of efforts to ensure safety on campus. Now, joining me on the news for more on this is News Central's international correspondent, Afia Hagen. Thank you for your time. Now, how exactly are the protesters asking, what exactly are they asking for?
Well, these protests have actually been going on since the October 7th attacks, and these protests are in protest that the Israel-Gaza war. Sit-ins have been happening in campuses up and down the country, but now this is a different phase to the protests. Now, these protests are about money going into companies who are doing business with Israel, and it's basically focused on universities that financially divest from Israel. So this pro-Palestinian campus groups are asking their institutions to support the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement as a way to push back against Israel. Now, no US university has ever committed to doing this, to the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement, but some have cut ties with specific financial institutions in the past. And that's really what these particular protesters are calling for.
Now, talking about these protests, which have spread far beyond Columbia University, what more what more do we know about this?
Well, yes. I mean, this started at Columbia University, but this has spread far and wide across the US. I can give you a bit of a rundown right now. Portland State University has shut down their campus today after demonstrators took over. Police in riot gear arrested 17 protesters at the University of Utah. Officials at the Virginia Commonwealth University said police made multiple arrests. At the California State Polytechnic University in Humboldt, it said it had restored order after police moved in yesterday evening to an encampment. Florida State University has had protests as well. But beyond America's borders, in Australia, there have been demonstrations at the University of Sydney and Melbourne. In Canada, in Montreal, at the Quebec campus of McGill University, protests are likely to be broken up by police later on today. There have been protests at Concordia University as well. In Egypt, at the American University in Cairo, in France, and in Italy as well. And here in the UK, you've got pro-Palestinian groups that have been gathering at the campuses of Leeds, UCL, and Warwick universities also. So this BDS movement that started on American campuses is spreading far and wide.
Now, what has been the reaction so far?
Well, President Trump earlier on today outside court said that President Biden should be making a statement on this, and the White House did do that. It made statements on behalf of the president saying that President Biden respects the right to free expression, but protests have to be peaceful and lawful, and said that forcibly taking over a building is not peaceful, it's wrong. And that's in relation to what the pictures that you see here, the overtaking of Hamilton Hall, which President Biden has said is absolutely the wrong approach. Republicans, including President Trump, have called out reports of anti-Semitic chants, harassment, and threats of violence. Now, the House Speaker, Mike Johnson, who has called on Columbia's president to resign over the handling of the protest. And he's actually gone one step further and said, this is not a protest, this is terrorism. The Republican Congresswoman Elise Stefanik told reporters that the university leadership has lost complete control.
I mean, just before I let you go, you said the word there. You said you used the word this might, according to your report, this might not just be a protest, this is terrorism. Now, this will lead me to my final question. Do you think this protest is a reflection of deeper security concerns within the country?
Well, it was actually the Republican House Speaker, Mike Johnson, that tweeted and said, this is not a protest, this is terrorism. So that direct quote is from him, not from me. But I think a lot of people are concerned that this could spread over and spill over into terrorism. But I think it has to be noted that there's protesting on both sides here. There's pro-Palestinian protesters and there's pro-Israeli protesters as well, and they have both formed these encampments across the university campuses. And I think actually police would like to keep this to a localized issue for universities to deal with it internally, to deal with students. You know, there've been talks of students potentially being suspended or expelled. I think people are scared perhaps that this could grow into a wider movement. But let's remember there have been pro-Palestinian and pro-Israeli protests all over the world, out with university campuses, people on the streets every weekend. That's been happening all over the world. But in terms of this turning into terrorism, I mean, the terrorist threat has been raised in a lot of countries since the start of the Israel-Gaza war anyway. When it comes to these particular campus protests turning into terrorism, I think people are worried about that, but police and universities themselves want to keep this to a more localized issue.
Afia Hagen, thank you for your time. Now, still on the Middle East conflict, Yemen's Houthi group said it had launched attacks on 2 U.S. warships and 2 commercial vessels linked to Israel in what it described as retaliation for U.S. and British involvement in Yemen. The group, which controls much of northern Yemen, said it targeted the American warships with drones in the Red Sea. Meanwhile, the U.S. Central Command said it intercepted 5 Houthi drones in the Red Sea. The Houthis also claimed responsibility for an attack on the Cladides, a cargo vessel they said was previously blacklisted by the group for violating the Houthi ban on ships traveling to Israeli ports.
انتصارا لمظلومية الشعب الفلسطيني وردا على العدوان الأمريكي البريطاني على بلدنا، نفذت القوات المسلحة اليمنية عمليات عسكرية ضد السفن الحربية المعادية في البحر الأحمر، منها استهداف مدمرتين حربيتين أمريكيتين، وذلك بعدد من الطائرات المسيرة. وقد حققت العمليات العسكرية أهدافها بنجاح بفضل الله، فيما نفذت القوات البحرية والقوات الصاروخية وسلاح الجو المسير في القوات المسلحة عملية مشتركة استهدفت سفينة سي كلايدز في البحر الأحمر، وكانت الإصابة دقيقة بفضل الله. استهداف السفينة جاء بعد انتهاكها قرار حظر مرور السفن المتجهة إلى موانئ فلسطين المحتلة، وذلك بتوجهها إلى ميناء أم الرشراش في 21 من أبريل الجاري بأسلوب الخداع والتمويه.
We'll go on a quick break. When we return, we have more stories. Stay with us. The news continues in America, where 4 U.S. law enforcement officials were killed and 4 others wounded in a shootout as they carried out a warrant at a home in southern state of North Carolina. According to the police, the shootout began as officers approached a home to serve a warrant for a felon wanted for possessing a firearm. The wanted man was later found dead on the property after he shot multiple officers and officers returned fire. The Department of Justice confirmed that a deputy U.S. Marshal and 2 task force officers were killed in the incident. The Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department revealed that 5 other officers were also shot, with one of the local police force in critical condition.
So about 1:30 p.m. this afternoon, the U.S. Marshals Fugitive Task Force went to the 5,000 block of Galway Avenue in an attempt to serve a warrant on an individual for possession of firearm by a convicted felon. When they approached that individual, they were met with gunfire. Officers returned gunfire and struck the victim, who was later pronounced deceased in the front yard of the residence. As officers approached that individual, they then received additional gunfire from inside of the residence.
Let's head to Europe, where the French Justice Minister, Eric Dupond-Moretti, says no one is above the law while responding to the invitation for questioning of the leader of the France Unbowed Party, Mathilde Panot. The leader of the far-left MPs in the French parliament was on Tuesday summoned by police in an investigation into suspected justification of terrorism over comments on the October 7th attack by Palestinian militant group Hamas on Israel. Mathilde Panot heads the lower house of parliament faction of the France Unbowed Party, which has been repeatedly accused by opponents of failing to clearly condemn the attack by Hamas.
Vous êtes injurieux à l'encontre de tous les magistrats de ce pays, Monsieur Bompard. Laissez faire la justice en toute indépendance et elle fera son travail. Soit c'est une infraction et elle le dira, soit ça n'est pas une infraction, elle le dira. Personne n'est au-dessus des lois, pas plus Madame Panot qu'une autre.
Still in the country, at least 4 persons were killed in apartment building fires that broke out in 2 separate Paris neighborhoods in France. 3 bodies were found soon after 8 a.m. in a 7th floor flat near the Opera Garnier in the center of the French capital. The blaze on the Boulevard des Italiens is believed to have started between 4 to 5 a.m. Mayor of the city's 4 central districts said those killed could not get out of the window because of bars installed to prevent burglars getting in via the roof. Prosecutors are also probing a second deadly fire in the 15th district near the Eiffel Tower. A 60-year-old person was found dead and another is in critical condition, with 2 in serious condition. In the UK, the police have condoned off land close in the Hanoi, East London, UK, following the arrest of a sword-wielding man who killed a boy aged 13 and injured several other persons. According to the Metropolitan Police, the incident happened around 7 a.m. on Tuesday, and a man with a sword was arrested. London Ambulance Service said its team treated 5 persons and took them all to hospital. Last week, Conservative Prime Minister Rishi Sunak criticized the Labour mayor's record on knife crime in the British capital. According to official statistics, knife crime increased in London by 20% in 2023, with 14,577 offences, 1% lower than pre-pandemic levels in the year to March 2020.
Great sadness that I confirm that one of those injured in the incident, a 13-year-old boy, has died from their injuries. He was taken to hospital after being stabbed and sadly died a short while after. A 36-year-old is currently in custody. He was tasered here at the scene and arrested 22 minutes after the first call was made to police shortly before 7 a.m. this morning. We know now that during the incident 5 people were injured, 3 members of the public and 2 of my local officers who were responding to the call. 2 of those members of the public remain in hospital. Thankfully their injuries are not believed to be life-threatening. The 2 Met police officers are also currently in hospital with stab wounds. Both require surgery and have significant injuries, but we believe at this stage that they were not life-threatening.
On the latest on the Russia-Ukraine war, Kyiv's authorities on Tuesday began taking down a Soviet-era monument celebrating friendship with Russia, more than 2 years into an invasion by Moscow which has cost tens of thousands of lives. The monument commemorates the signing of the 1654 of a treaty binding Ukraine to Russian rule. The structure, a series of stone sculptures depicting the the treaty's Ukrainian and Russian signatories was installed in a park in central Kyiv as part of a memorial complex celebrating the friendship between Russians and Ukrainians. Since the invasion began in 2022, Kyiv authorities had already taken down 2 bronze statues depicting a Ukrainian and a Russian worker at the same site.
І все остальне, в принципі, це все ресурси, як не крути. У нас є захисники, яким недостатньо всього і шоломів, а в нас наша влада тратить кошти зовсім не на те, і час. Я думаю, що це можна було просто перейменувати там, або якось назву йому другу зробити, а цим всім зараз займатися, я думаю, що не на часі це.
Talking climate action now. G7 ministers have agreed a time frame for phasing out coal-fired power plants, setting as a goal that the mid-2030s, in a move hailed as significant by some environmentalists, but slammed as too late by others. The Group of 7 two-day meeting in Turin was the first big political session since the world pledged at the United Nations COP28 Annual Climate Summit in Dubai in December to transition away from the coal, oil and gas. Now, the G7 brings together Canada, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, the UK and the US. Negotiations over a fixed date was reportedly tricky. Some countries and many environmentalists had been pushing for a 2030 limit, but Japan, which relies heavily on coal, was reluctant to set a date.
Carbone è una delle fonti di maggiore emissione climalteranti e su questo devo dire un grazie particolare perché c'è stato un lavoro notevole da parte di tutti i paesi, da parte della Troika e in particolare degli amici che rappresentano il Giappone con un obiettivo di uscita. È stato indicato nel...
Iga Swiatek bounced back from dropping the first set of defeat Brazilian Beatriz Haddad Maia on Tuesday and made the Madrid Open semi-finals. The world #1, who lost last year's final to Ayana, found a rhythm in the second set and ultimately eased to a 4-6, 6-0, 6-2 victory. The Pole will face either American Madison Keys or Tunisia's 8th seed Ons Jabeur for a place in the final. Swiatek is beaten for her 3rd WTA 1000 title of the season after triumphs in Qatar and at Indian Wells, and 9th in total. That's a wrap on the news at this time. Don't forget to send in your eyewitness report to the WhatsApp number on the screen. You can also follow us on social media. We are at News Central TV. You can watch us across these platforms: DSTV channel 422, Star Times channel 274, Avo TV, and YouTube. Many thanks for watching. I'm Dakbo at Digboy. Bye for now.